You know, there are advantages and disadvantages to being in America when the festival is here in London. I had a letter many, many months ago that asked me to submit a topic for my lecture and a brief outline. So I filled it out and I sent it back, and I waited a few months and I didn't hear anything. And then soon I got a brochure in the mail from the Festival for Mind and Body, and I had sent in something about talking about the possible human and spiritual development. I got this brochure back, and it says Paul Solomon talking about love and sex in the New Age. So I did my homework, which was a lot of fun. I wanted to be sure and be prepared. Actually, it's a very challenging topic because too little has been said, and leaves a very good reason to be, I think, considerably more frank and honest and direct and open than we have been in the New Age and the whole spiritual community about sexuality. We've come through a period of world history that, quite frankly, I think is a little stupid. We have, I think, caused ourselves a great deal of harm in society by a period of what we thought was civilized development of world culture. It was a period that was characterized by beliefs that we are supposed to love everybody else, but not ourselves, and that we are supposed to believe that our bodies are the temples of God. I mean, precious and beautiful and housing a spiritual presence, all except one or two little parts, which we don't mention, and we keep hidden, and we think of as dirty and disgusting and things that we don't discuss in public and so on. And coming through a few generations of that has produced something that I think is just incredibly unhealthy in our culture. As a matter of fact, I'm absolutely convinced that this era that we have called the Victorian era, in which we decided that parts of our bodies were unacceptable, I really think that that's the basic reason for the fact that in our generation today, we have epidemic cancer in the venereal organs, in the reproductive organs, all over the world, the civilized world. It's not true in primitive societies. Isn't that interesting? In societies that are not so concerned with hiding their sexuality, we don't find this epidemic proportions of cancer in the reproductive organs. Our body is an incredible instrument, your body and my body individually. I'm not talking about just the human instrument as a study, but our own individual body. In fact, I want to say this more personally. I'm talking about your body specifically, you personally. Try to hear this personally and not as a big group. Try to hear that personally, your body is an incredibly fascinating instrument. And I think it is vitally important for you to know that. I'm sure that all of you have grown up somewhat as I have with the idea that my body is all right, but I wish it was like his or hers or somebody else's. You know, my body doesn't have Hollywood aesthetics. You notice? But it's cuddly. And it's fun. A lot of us have had these feelings that my body is all right, but I wish it were something else. And the interesting thing about that is that your body is so responsive, so extremely responsive to your thought, that it is impossible for you to think a negative thought about your body without having a chemical, physical reaction in your body. Your body is that sensitive and that responsive. Now, what do you suppose happens when you spend a whole lifetime thinking, I'm not satisfied with my body. I wish mine looked like that. What are you doing to your body when you think that way? It can't help but have a negative and adverse effect on your own health every time you think a negative thought or think of yourself as being less acceptable than somebody else. You are programming yourself, you're training your body, your mind, your personality, your emotions, all to respond in an inadequate way. Now, take that one step further. And supposing that, instead of just saying, my body is inadequate, supposing you say, there is a portion of my body that is unacceptable, dirty, should not be looked at, shouldn't be talked about, shouldn't even be admitted to exist, especially in public. Now, what do you suppose that that portion of your anatomy is going to feel in response to that thought? You can't think such a thought without having an effect on your body. It is natural that the body tends to reject portions of itself that are rejected by the consciousness. And as a result, we have literally produced epidemic cancer by our thoughts and our attitudes toward sexuality in this culture. Now, there's a first very good reason, in my opinion, that we need to work with our attitudes toward sexuality and ourselves as sexual beings. We need to develop a whole new attitude and philosophy across the board in our culture to begin to treat one another differently, and particularly to treat ourselves differently, so that we have the love, the respect, the acceptance of our entire body as a temple of a spirit of creativity, a divine spirit that can live in us and speak through us. I think that the single most important step in healthy sexuality is a right relationship with self. We have two very strong survival needs in this culture that are not terribly recognized, not universally recognized. We all are aware of the survival need of breath, air. We need to breathe. We need to eat. We need to drink. All of these standard things we recognize as survival needs. But there's another one. The need for love and acceptance is literally a survival need. It is proved by the fact that children, babies, born in hospitals where they don't have specific attention of a particular individual, a particular love relationship, a baby in that situation will literally die from lack of love, even if they get proper nutrition and all of the other things. It's called institutional illness, and babies have actually died from institutional illness. Now, we know that, but we probably don't recognize that that survival need goes with us throughout life. We need to be loved and accepted. We have a desperate need for love and acceptance. There's another need. There is a need to do something that feels like completing ourselves, or maybe a better word is to polarize ourselves with another individual. There is a need to polarize self, usually with the opposite sex, to feel complete and to feel balanced. And that urge grows and is recognized more, of course, after puberty. When we become sexually active, that becomes a very strong survival need. And then there's another survival need, a third one, and that is to connect again, to reconnect in consciousness with our source. Three important survival needs. And these three needs can do very interesting and strange things to people who don't understand them or who express them in a wrong kind of way. First of all, the need to be loved and accepted. Let's examine that one first, because it's very basic to the other two. You and I have a survival need to be loved and accepted, and it is so universal and it's so basic to our drives that we find ourselves dressing in order to suit that need. We dress for other people. We even think, what will they think when I wear this? We decorate our homes in order to get love and acceptance, to get acceptability, all rightness from other people. We choose things that we say, the way that we act, the way that we do things. For most of our life, we are engaged in trying to impress other people, trying to think, what will they think, trying to get our all rightness, trying to get everybody else in society to admit it's all right for me to be alive. And we make a career out of it. Most people, in fact, I'm not just talking about a few, but probably 95% of the people of the world make that the most important thing in life, to get my all rightness from society, to get people to admit that it's all right for me to be alive. We have a classic demonstration of it in the United States. Every 4 years, there is some man who has a great deal of drive, several men actually, who have a great deal of drive to be recognized as all right. They spend tons of money trying to get the ultimate all rightness from the American people. And by the time their little contest is finished, only one of them has gotten a statement of all rightness, and the rest crawl off to lick their wounds and think about 4 years later. Now, the one who got that ultimate all rightness is just fine for a very short period of time. And then within about 3 months, people decide he's not all right after all. And he spends the next 3.5 years wondering why he ever did it. And then he tries again, 3.5 years later. And if he loses, then he goes off somewhere to write some memoirs explaining all his mistakes, and then he goes off quietly and dies. It's a very sad thing, actually. And these people, trying desperately to get their all rightness from others, have missed one little basic point. It is true. You need love and acceptance, and so do I. It's literally a survival need. It's not just an emotional thing. It's not just an idea. We have to have it. We're born with that need. But something that you might not have been told is you can't get it from anybody else. It's not even possible. Here's at least 95% of the people of the world trying to get it from somebody else, and nobody has told them that's not possible. Even if somebody else does give you all rightness, if somebody else believes that you're all right, you'll find that delightful for a moment. But if you haven't found yourself acceptable and all right, you won't believe them. You can't get your all rightness from somebody else. When you do, it only makes you hungrier, and you're trying to get it from somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And even that one poor person who did give you all rightness is in trouble, because what you're likely to do if you don't find yourself all right and somebody else does find you all right and begins to say, I love you, then you'll begin to want more love and more love and more love, which is all right for a little while. But then you'll wonder, just how much do you love me? And in order to find out, you'll do strange things. Kick them in the shins and, now do you love me? You ever see people doing that? It's the most common thing in the world in marriages. If you ever do marriage counseling, you'll see these two people coming in who have found where each other's little buttons are. We have all these little buttons. And one of the first things you do in marriage is tell your partner what all the things are that bother you most. Now, it's the worst thing you can do. Try to remember that. When you get married, keep your buttons hidden. Because as soon as that other person finds out where your buttons are, the rest of your marriage is going to be this match. Who's pushing whose buttons in order to get the most attention? I believe that you love me if you really hurt when I want to hurt you and still let me get away with it and love me afterwards. And so it becomes this masochistic, sadistic exchange between two people hurting each other and making up, and hurting each other and making up. And then finally hurting each other too much to make up. Two people who don't love themselves trying to get their all rightness from one another when they haven't given it to self. The ultimate all rightness, and the only one that will really satisfy this inner need, is to find your own all rightness with you. And it is absolutely basic to healthy sexuality. If you have not found yourself acceptable and all right, then you will explore sexuality trying to find your all rightness from someone else. Now, that's okay, except for a couple of problems. One is that someone else is trying to get their all rightness from you. They are so busy trying to get you to find them all right that it never occurred to them that they're supposed to tell you that you're all right. So you have this contest between two people trying to get their all rightness from each other. And it's like grabbing from one another, trying to get you to tell me that I'm all right when I'm not all right enough to tell you that you're all right, because I wouldn't believe that you care anyway. Does it sound familiar? I see these little flashes of recognition going on. That's the kind of culture that we've grown up in. We are, in fact, supposed to pretend, especially if you're a woman, you're supposed to pretend that you don't want to do it anyway. And then you're supposed to pretend that you don't really enjoy it, except, when his feelings get hurt, and then you have to really enjoy it in order to prove to him his manhood, which proves to him his all-rightness, which only works for a few minutes because the next time he's going to try to surpass what he did last time, and there's only so far that you can go, So how do you convince him then that he's all right? And then if you don't function that way, then you start wondering about your all-rightness. I mean, if you're a woman and you don't really experience orgasm with your husband, then first of all, you think there's something wrong with you, and then you wonder if there's something wrong with him, and then he wonders what's wrong with you, and then he wonders what's wrong with him, and then both of you are in trouble because both of you are going to counseling to a fellow who is embarrassed to talk about sex in the first place and doesn't know quite how far he can go with you. Isn't it crazy what we've gotten ourselves into? We are beings with a very, very basic need for love first. And when that has been taken care of, these other things become a little bit simpler. First, as a first step, if you can individually take responsibility yourself for being loved, think of it like this. You were given this incredible instrument that you call your body and your mind, your identity, who and what you are. It is all fascinating. If you examine it, there are some very basic things that are true about it, and these are undeniable. These are not just opinions, these are facts. A fact, your body is incredibly intricate. Probably the most intricate organism in all of the universe. As far as we know, it must be the most intricate. It is extremely delicate, extremely sensitive, very, very complex, highly responsive, so responsive that every thought, every word, every idea that approaches it has a chemical effect upon it. It is like an incredibly wonderful and responsive computer. Try to imagine a scene where a master computer mechanic has spent his whole lifetime studying computers and working on them, and he gets a call one day from a company that has this magnificent computer, and he is told, this computer is malfunctioning. Will you come out and fix it for us? And so he goes and he takes a look at this computer, and he finds it incredibly intricate. The most fascinating computer that he has ever seen. Wonderful, responsive, delicate, intricate, all of those things. And he's talking about this fascinating computer, and the person who has called him is listening, and he's saying, this is absolutely wonderful. And the man who calls him says, yes, but it's malfunctioning. But the malfunction doesn't change the fact that this is a wonderful computer. And then he traces to find out where the malfunction is, and when he comes to the location of the malfunction, he finds that it is only the incredible responsiveness of it. It did exactly what it was told to do, and wasn't a malfunction at all. It was just the programming that was put into it. So it is with your body. You have this incredible instrument that is wonderful, even if you're malfunctioning. Even if your body is sick or has some kind of distortion, disease, or whatever, it doesn't change the fact that your body, factually, is intricate, delicate, complex, fascinating, and absolutely wonderful. Now that's personal, that's your body, and you need to begin to think that way. And then when you think about it, I've been given this incredible instrument, and I was told when I came into life by my creative source, I was given this instrument and I was told, love it, give it lots of love, that's what it needs, take care of it, and it will serve you well. So I came into this body and entered this life and encountered all of these other people who said, my body needs love and you're supposed to give it to me. You're not supposed to love yours now. That's not nice. You're supposed to be something called humble. And humble means that every time somebody notices how wonderful your instrument is, you're supposed to say, oh, well, me, I'm not very much. And it's called humility. And you call that humility in spite of the fact that you spent all of that money on those clothes and the paints and doing your hair, and you know that you did a good job, and somebody notices, and you're supposed to say, oh, well, now, you know, that's not humility, it's dishonesty. The fact is, you are absolutely wonderful, and what you are and who you are, all that you are, desperately needs love in order to survive, and if you are not giving love to who and what you are, shame on you. It will cause disease, it will hurt you, it will make you form wrong kinds of relationships, it will ruin your sexual experience, it will ruin marriage for you, it will ruin an awful lot of life. You have an obligation. It's not just all right to love yourself. You have a responsibility to love yourself because it's the only way that what you are can survive. And when you have taken this responsibility to recognize the value of your body, your identity, your personality, your mind, and all that you are, when you know, my mind is incredible. Now, I'm not talking about IQ here, and I'm not talking about comparing your mind with other minds. Perhaps there are other minds that are more outstanding than yours in terms of what they've accomplished. But in any case, if you examine what your mind is, you will find that it is an absolutely incredible, fascinating instrument. So fascinating that teams of scientists for generations have studied and studied and studied and still don't quite understand it. You personally have an interesting and fascinating mind. It's time for you to recognize, I have this incredible mind, this fascinating body. You know your body's fascinating, don't you? I bet you do know it. I bet you every one of you has examined every inch of it in mirrors, haven't you? You know it's fascinating. It's fascinating not just to you. It's fascinating to the whole world. It's fascinating to other people, your body individually. It's important for you to realize that, to admit it. I have a fascinating body. Whatever it looks like, whatever it's shaped like, it's fascinating, intricate, delicate, complex, and absolutely wonderful, and so is my mind. Now, it's not just all right to love that. In fact, that doesn't make it just all right. It makes it wonderful. What you are is wonderful, and it is essential that you recognize that and pigs to whether anybody else does or not. Don't let yourself get into those games or you'll be in trouble, because the people that you want to notice how wonderful you are having their own problems with being noticed for being wonderful, and they don't want to rush out and tell you how wonderful you are. They're too busy trying to get you to notice how wonderful they are. Why have this contest going on? I mean, make up your mind, take your own responsibility, and have it settled. I have made a decision about me. I am absolutely wonderful, and that's settled. Now, with this quality of confidence, this quality of all rightness, this security, I am loved. I am loved because I have taken responsibility for that. I give love to me and to what I am. Having that taken care of, I can now turn my attention to you, to your needs, and to my recognition of the interesting fact that all that I found to love in me is also true of you. When I meet you, before I even get to know you as an individual, I already know something about you. First of all, I know that your body is an intricate, delicate, fascinating, complex, wonderful, responsive instrument. I know that. I know that your mind is incredible and wonderful and fascinating and all that other string of adjectives. I know that. I also know that you do some wonderful things sometimes. And I know that you're absolutely rotten sometimes. Every one of you. And I know that before I even meet you. Now, the interesting thing is that we have this crazy thing in this culture about liking people or disliking them depending on when you meet them. If you meet them when they're on their best behavior, doing wonderful things, then it's all right to love them. But if you meet them at a time when they're doing one of their rotten things, then you consider them a rotten person. He's a wonderful person, he's a rotten person. And it really depended on when we met, because he, the wonderful person, does some rotten things sometimes, and he, the rotten person, does some wonderful things sometimes. What I need to know is, before I ever get to know you individually, I may as well realize that if I know you well enough, I'm going to love you. And there's no point in going through all of the ritual and ceremony about it. Why don't I just realize in the first place, it's all right to love you. Even if I don't know you, I meet you with the assumption, I'm going to love you. I meet you expecting you to love me. Of course you will. I mean, why not? I'm wonderful. I'm lovable. And if you don't love me, it's just because you don't know me well enough yet. Or maybe it's because you don't love yourself and you're afraid to give love because you need it so much. And in either case, it's all right. I can love you anyway, even if you don't love me. And I choose to do so because I know how good it feels. I don't love you in order to do you a favor. I love you because it feels wonderful from my side to give love. And I find that the more I give, the more I have to give. And I have a security in doing that that will allow me to form relationships in a different way than this scared feeling of trying to get together with another person, holding your love as if it's something very delicate and very precious, and extending it out and saying, I think I want to love you, but I'm afraid you won't love me. I want to get to know you, but I'm kind of scared. You know, please don't hurt my feelings. Please don't find me unacceptable because I'll be hurt. As a matter of fact, there's this whole thing about love in our culture. When you say, I love you to someone, what it really means is, I am investing a part of my all rightness in you, and if you don't love me back, I'm going to be terribly hurt. Half our songs are written about hearts broken because she didn't love me as much as I loved her, and all this crazy business. We believe ourselves to be so delicate and so easily hurt. I mean, the whole idea of love in our culture is based on the idea that you are more in control of how I feel than I am. Now think about that for a moment. My all rightness, my emotions are your responsibility. Whether I feel good at any moment depends on whether you are being nice to me. Now that means that if you are my enemy, if you would deliberately hurt my feelings, then by definition you are my enemy. And so I'm saying that you, my enemy, are more in control of how I feel than I am. Now isn't that a heck of a state of affairs? It's absurd. It is downright absurd. It isn't true. Nobody else, no other human being, has ever made you angry. It's never happened in your life. The only thing that another human being can do is what they want to do or what they need to do, and if that doesn't match your expectations, you can get angry if you want to, but it's a choice. Nobody else can make you angry. Nobody can hurt you, but you can make a decision to be hurt if another person doesn't meet your expectations. Nobody else can make you jealous, but you can make a decision that that is the appropriate emotional response to something that somebody else did, if you want to. But the most important thing that you can learn in a love relationship or a sexual relationship is that ultimately the way that you feel at any given moment, under any conditions, the way that you feel is your responsibility and your choice, and you can always make a different choice if you want to. And when you learn to do so, then you're ready to form a healthy relationship with another person. Taking responsibility for your emotions, knowing that you are already loved, you can form a love relationship with another person, feeling whole about it and not putting onto them the responsibility for your own survival. I mean, have you seen these relationships in which one person is threatening to kill himself or herself if that other person doesn't love them? I mean, that's not love, it's manipulation. I manipulate you into having a relationship with me by threatening to kill myself if you don't. And I call that love? And then we're going to have a sexual relationship in that, and worst of all, we're going to bring a child into that atmosphere to grow up thinking that that's what marriage and love is all about. Quite frankly, I think you and I live in an insane society. We've been taught these kinds of values that say, love others but not yourself, when it's impossible to do so. And we've been taught that we are all victims. We feel good or bad depending on what other people feel about us. We're victims of the weather, we're victims of the government, we're victims of the economy, we're victims of one another and how he treated me. We're always talking about, you make me mad, you hurt my feelings, always externalizing the cause of what we feel. The most important thing in life is to begin to become master of who I am, taking responsibility for the way that I feel because I've decided to, being whole, so that then I can enter a relationship with you without putting a burden on that relationship and making it your responsibility to make me feel loved. It's beautiful to share love. It is the most beautiful experience in the world to be able to give love and receive love and to share that, but not to have to manipulate to get it, and not to be in a position of feeling I can't survive unless I have that from that other person. That's selfish. It's not love in the first place. If I can't let you go to where you want to be and do what you want to do, I don't really love you. Sorry about that. I didn't make the rules. That's just the way it is. Now think about it. You have what you call a marriage, which I have some argument with, by the way. I have some rather unconventional ideas, so it's quite all right if you disagree with me. I will understand. I know that you have been taught differently. But my feeling is that the only thing more rare than marriage in our culture is divorce. Did that make any sense? Maybe I should say it this way. Divorce is a question that really doesn't come up when marriage occurs. Because when there is a marriage, there is no discussion of divorce. But what we call marriage in our culture has become a thing that has to do with the state and a legal contract. That's not marriage. It is a contract for imprisonment. I mean, we get this legal thing that says another person is obligated to perform in a particular way in regard to me, and we have all of these strings and ties. That isn't marriage. It has nothing to do with marriage. It's a state-run kind of thing that has to do with economics and convenience and manipulation of other people and that sort of thing. Marriage is an experience that happens between two individuals when their souls bond together as one. It's rare. It doesn't occur very often. It doesn't occur very often because it doesn't occur to most people that it can even happen. We have instead a biological meeting of two bodies and then a signing of a contract that says, I now own you, and you will have to behave in certain ways according to my expectation, according to law. It's a little absurd. I don't believe in it. I don't particularly want any part of that kind of relationship. And as far as divorce taking place after that sort of thing, it's a state matter. I don't see anything about religion or spirituality in it. If you break that kind of bond, you've broken a bond, but you haven't broken a marriage. That's a very different thing. So when people come to me and say, do you believe in divorce? I don't quite know how to answer that. I mean, the answer is divorce is not something that is discussed between two people who are married. It isn't a question that comes up. So now what do? I have this relationship. I can hear you thinking. I have this relationship in which I've signed this contract with another person, and I either want to make it into a marriage or I want to be free of it. What do I really do? Well, first of all, I think that the first step in forming a relationship is a right relationship with self. Get that straight. Get responsibility. Take responsibility for being loved. And when you have learned really to love yourself, accept yourself and be all right with yourself, take responsibility for how you feel, then you'll find it quite easy to love and accept another person. And you can love and accept that person with their mistakes and faults and errors. I didn't mention that. When you love yourself, it is important to give yourself the right to make mistakes. You love yourself not because you don't make mistakes, but you love yourself because it is all right to make mistakes. It's all right for you to make mistakes. It's all right for another person to make mistakes. And you love anyway. Don't withhold love because of someone making a mistake. Learn to love yourself, and you can love another freely. Unconditional love comes from security within self. When I am secure in knowing that I'm all right and I have love, I can give love unconditionally. That's the first step. The second step in forming a right relationship for sex or for marriage is to come together with another individual and to spend so much time getting inside one another. Not sexually at first, but through the mind on many levels. First of all, verbally. One thing that I suggest in any marriage relationship, and this is whether you've been married 20 years or whether you're going to get married next week, one thing that I think is vitally important that you should do, and do it immediately, is to sit down with your partner, with this other person, and talk, just talk, about anything and about everything, but talk and see if you can do it absolutely round the clock for 24 hours straight through. Keep talking. And it doesn't matter what you're talking about at all. You can talk about anything. You don't have to talk about your problems. You don't have to talk about specific things. Just talk. Because talking about the way you grow up, talking about things that you like and don't like, talking about your philosophy of life, talking about politics, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, but the fact that you are talking will cause the other person to get inside you and see the way that you think. Now, obviously, if you've been married 20 years, you think that you know the way that other person thinks, don't you? Tell you what, betcha. I bet that person doesn't think at all like you thought they thought. And if you talk and talk and talk, spend that time listening to one another. Now, this is important too. If you're going to initiate such a thing with another person, first of all, understand something about the sexuality of the individual, you and your partner. There is something, I don't know if I should get into words like chakras because I don't know what your background is, but according to ancient tradition, there are 7 vortexes of energy in the human body. And in the male, 4 of those are masculine and 3 are feminine. And in the female, 4 of them are feminine and 3 are masculine. And the idea behind that is that it is possible for both male and female to become male or female in any given relationship, which means in a conversation, I become feminine, passive, and I provide the womb in the relationship when I am listening. Think of a conversation as a sexual experience. We call it intercourse, don't we? A conversation is an intercourse between 2 individuals. One of those individuals, if it is happening properly, one of those individuals has a womb, and the other is impregnating that womb with a thought, a creative idea. And if that one who is being feminine will receive that idea and incubate it, it will bring birth to an understanding in the relationship. So by all means, when you are forming a sexual relationship or a love relationship with another individual, first become feminine and let that other person impregnate your consciousness. And then reverse roles. Men,
Reverse roles and you become feminine. And you provide the womb and become impregnated by the consciousness of your wife. Until you understand the way that she thinks and what her ideals and hopes and wishes are, until you bear her child. And when you bear her child in you, and she bears your child in her consciousness first, you are married on a mental level, an understanding level. You have incubated the thoughts of one another, and you have made a real bond at a mental and emotional level. When you have bonded mentally and emotionally, then explore one another physically. In our culture, because of the idea of hiding our bodies, we're supposed to believe that these wonderful temples of ours are supposed to be covered up by clothes. And so we look at those and decorate them and so on. But the body itself, the temple, we really keep that sort of hidden. And sometimes even in marriage, do you know how many married couples have never really seen each other? They undress in the dark, they undress in closets, they do it under the covers, and all this business. By all means, explore one another. Head to toe intimately. Explore and explore and explore. And explore and touch places that you never thought that you would touch. And let your partner touch places that you never thought you would let anybody touch. Until you know that body and are free and comfortable with it. If you don't, you'll find the little difficulties with that popping up a little bit later in feelings of invasion of privacy, even with this person that you're supposed to be bonded together with in a marriage. Make that warmth and togetherness with your partner so full and so real that you cannot be violated in your person by that other person. And if you don't have that quality of trust for the person that you're coming together with, for goodness sake, don't have a sexual relationship with them. And especially not a marriage relationship with them, and certainly not children. Bring yourself to that experience that you can so wholly be together and give yourself to one another, that there is nothing hidden in that relationship. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have your private projects over here and he has his private projects over there. By all means, have some independence and some expression of freedom, but not because you're afraid of violating one another, not because you are afraid of being open and trusting and experiencing one another totally. When you have gotten inside one another on all of these other levels, then express what you're going to do together with your life. Now, there may be a project that she has and a project that you have. That may be quite separate. But what about the other project? What are you going to do together? The together project is what the marriage is built round and should grow with the both of you. And even if your marriage relationship has been going on for years, and at this point you want to heal it, these are the places to start. Don't start working on your marriage itself. Start working on yourself. Get yourself ready first and be loved, and be prepared to be loved even if the other person doesn't agree that you're lovely. Be lovely anyway. Feel beautiful. Feel loved. Take responsibility for that yourself. And know that whether the relationship continues or whether it doesn't, you are, in fact, all right. And nobody else will make that decision for you. Only you can decide that you are all right. Have a love relationship with your source and within yourself. Then see if you can open the relationship with your partner by having this marathon talkathon. Talk around the clock until you get inside one another and see what heals then. If you really hear what another person is feeling, you will probably heal the relationship, even if it is a relationship that has been drifting apart and drifting apart. By listening, by talking, by hearing, by becoming feminine when the other is masculine,
and masculine when the other is feminine, by feeding, impregnating one another, and giving birth on levels of consciousness, you can heal a marriage relationship and make it real and whole. Those are some of the ideas of sexuality and marriage in the New Age. It's just an introduction. And what I would like to do is give a couple of minutes for you to think about it, and I'm going to come back and we're going to make this a dialogue. I'd like to know what areas that you would like to talk about. And in doing this, I want to assure you that there are no sacred areas that we can't talk about. So if there's something that you want to ask about, and you're a little shy about it, just give me a hint and I'll try to figure out what you're talking about. And we will try to discuss it. And if I don't know the answer, I know someone upstairs. I will listen for a moment and see if I can find out.
I think that the gay movement has helped many people to come to an experience of that essential self-love you talk about. And I speak as someone who is gay. I think that soul marriage, that beautiful communion you mentioned, is equally possible amongst people, amongst experience relationships with similar genders. You mentioned that there is this urge to polarize. And so often in esoteric teachings, those very words are used to put down gay relationships. And I'm very saddened often by that, and I'm often made angry. But I also recognize that I make myself angry. But I want to ask the question, and I want to say, what has the New Age got to say to people working to integrate consistent gay feelings in themselves, and also other sexual minorities, people who wish to be another gender, for instance, transsexuals and so forth. Okay. I want to be part of the New Age, and I don't want to wait until I'm heterosexual. I also want to say is as I learned to be gay, I actually feel more heterosexual. That there's some relationship there. Can you comment on that, please?
Okay. First of all, I'm a little concerned that we get into such labels in our culture. I hear this thing, he's a homosexual, he's a heterosexual, she's bisexual, and so on. And I can't think of anything more sort of degrading to me. I'm a heterosexual. I'm not a sexual, I'm a human being. And in that sense, I just don't believe that there is such a thing as a heterosexual or a homosexual. There are human beings. And human beings express love for one another. I don't have a great deal of concern about the plumbing of the person for whom you have love. It is not the biological description of the body that makes love in the first place. Love is a soul union. It goes much deeper than that. And the way that you find to explore one another and to touch a body, I'm just really concerned that we have all of these ideas about you are supposed to touch a person of that gender, but preferably only one, and never, ever, ever should a man ever touch a penis. And so here are all of these men all over the world, millions of them, who are wondering how theirs compares. They'll never find out because they can't explore another one. And it's a major psychological problem. However funny it may seem, it's a major psychological problem that people get into wondering. I think it is absolutely criminal that in our culture we have this hiding and this dirtiness, don't touch yourself. You know, one of the most early things that we need to do as a human being is explore ourselves, our bodies, and explore it freely and get to know it, and get to know what it looks like, what it feels like, what it functions like, what sensations are produced, and for goodness sake, to tell a child that is dirty, that's awful, when he finds something wonderful in himself. I mean, it really does set up a problem very early, doesn't it? You have found something that feels absolutely wonderful. Well, that's awful. You shouldn't do it. And now he has this problem. So a man much later who feels very deprived of masculine love has this great urge, this deep need to explore another penis, to touch it. If he does, then he accepts upon himself the idea of, that makes me a homosexual. Well, it didn't make him anything. It made him the human being that he was, who has now had the experience of touching another penis for which he had some emotional need. Wonderful. But we didn't allow him to satisfy that need. What we did was, we told him that he is something because he had that need. Now he's no longer a human being. Now he's gay. And so now he joins a gay culture and accepts this label and says, that's what I am. It isn't what I am, it is what I have done. It is part of the craziness of this society that we even bother to label somebody for an experience that they have had. I simply will not recognize there are gay people and there are straight people. I mean, I'm not going to label you by what you have done with another human being in the exploration of your sexuality. You are a human being. And you have every right and every reason, even an obligation, to explore the feelings and the curiosity that you have for another human being. And if you have never had a whole complete relationship with another human being of the same sex because you're scared of that, because it would label you, it doesn't make you heterosexual to deny those feelings or that experience. And it doesn't make you homosexual if you do. Throw away the labels, get to know one another, and know the human being is a wonderful, incredible instrument. And men have wonderful bodies, and it's all right for a man to notice that. And women have wonderful and beautiful bodies. And when I say coming together with polarization of another person, I don't mean to imply something about the biological makeup of that person about it. We polarize ourselves with other people according to a pattern of thinking and a depth of need inside. And it doesn't have an awful lot to do with the way the physical body is made. It has to do with the polarity of the individual. And there are people in a feminine body who have a masculine polarity, and people in a masculine body who have a feminine polarity, and they will be polarized in a different way than you will be. And the rest of that is, legal complications and social problems and so on. But from a spiritual level, love happens on the level of the soul. The way that you find to express it physically is quite a different matter. Another question?
You said, I want to refer to something that I read that you wrote. I can't say precisely, but it was in a paper in which you explained that a sexual union, a physical union, involved an occult exchange, which was really indissoluble in a way. I mean, I may not be quoting it correctly, but it seems to contradict in a slight way what you were saying earlier, which is that in a way, although a lot of people think they're getting married or think that they're forming relationships, in effect they are not. And that achieving that is really a much greater work than most people assume. Now, and I'm, if you see my question, I'm trying to find out where they meet up. Because that caused me to think a lot.
Okay. The question is that I have made a statement that when there is an exchange of body fluids between two individuals in a sexual relationship, there is a bonding which occurs. And that bonding is something that continues throughout life. So if we've had many, many sexual relationships, then we have these bonds, strings like cords, tying me emotionally to other individuals. And it's not necessarily a healthy thing. It can be a very draining experience because the ups and downs of these other individuals with whom I'm bonded can be very stressful on the emotions and on the body energies. So it's a good idea for that reason to be very selective in whom I form a bond with. But this bonding doesn't mean the same thing as marriage. Marriage is a bonding on 7 levels. A sexual relationship causes a bonding on 1 level. An emotional relationship that was never sexual causes a bonding on a different level.
So there is a mental bonding, a spiritual bonding, an emotional bonding, as well as a physical bonding. And when the bonds happen at all of those levels, we are then totally married and not just bonded to another person. So it isn't just a sexual relationship that produces bonds between individuals. There are emotional relationships, and there are bonds that are built between men with men and women with women that are interesting in that they are not sexual bonds on the physical level, but they are emotional bonds that are very deep and supportive and very important. Most men feel from time to time somewhat depleted of masculine energy, and it's an interesting thing. We have rituals in this culture that are acceptable for men to replenish their masculine energy. One of them is a game of football. Getting in football, we get into contact sports in which we run into each other, we touch, we feel, we fondle each other in very subtle ways that are not called fondling, of course. But we have these exchanges of energy that revitalize the masculine nature that we must have. We also have a need for revitalizing the feminine side of our relationship. And the interesting thing is, it is not necessary to have a genital sexual relationship to do that. It is very important that men have intimate contact with women. That is, be in their presence, share with them socially, conversationally, and emotionally. It can be very rejuvenating to do so. If the craving of our nature, if the craving of polarity is very, very deeply for masculine polarity, we will be drawn into a homosexual relationship. And if there is that deep craving for taking in the masculine polarity, then by all means that person should be looking for a way to satisfy that polarity need. And there are many ways of doing it. It may or may not be done in a sexual act, but we both have needs for coming into contact intimately, conversationally, socially, and touching to some extent with people of both the same and the opposite sex. And people who do not do so are usually emotionally imbalanced, and very often spiritually imbalanced, and sometimes physically imbalanced as a result of it. But those exchanges can happen on many levels.
Does the source have anything to say, or has the source mentioned to you anything about the concept of the soulmate and also astral sex? And if so, would you mind elaborating or talking about it?
Okay. Soulmate first. There is a very deep and profound awareness in almost every one of us that there's a missing part of me. The ancients tell us in many of the ancient cultures that in mankind's earliest experience as a being, that we were androgynous, both masculine and feminine in the same body. And one of the early acts of manifesting on this plane was the separation of the male from the female. And ever since that time, throughout history, all males have felt incomplete without the bonding with their other half, their other side, which is called a soulmate. But there are two expressions of that. One is we are separated from the higher self, which leaves this soulmate hunger, and very often this need to be fulfilled spiritually will translate itself into a need to be fulfilled sexually, and we will look for spiritual fulfillment in a sexual relationship. A sexual relationship can very often help us toward spiritual fulfillment together, but they do not substitute one for the other. And usually, when a person is really desperately looking for their soulmate, they usually have a confusion between their spiritual completion and their sexual relationship or life-term relationship with another individual. Personally, I think it is much more important for individuals to look for what I would call a life mate instead of a soulmate. Instead of trying to find your soulmate, the broken off part of yourself that will complete you, there is
very likely someone with whom you can best spend your life for this lifetime to best accomplish what this life's purpose is. And finding that person can be a great compliment, great benefit toward completing your life work. Now, that's not true of everybody, but it is true of many people, perhaps most people. And that life-mate relationship is much more important to seek than a soulmate relationship. She asked about the experience of astral sex, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the idea, there are many times during sleep when the astral body, the astral essence of who I am, may be separated from the physical body. And it's an experience that's very much like out-of-body travel, the experience of being separated from the physical body. And sometimes during these experiences, when I'm out of the body, I may experience a sexual relationship with someone else, and it may be someone that I know, and it may be someone that I don't know in my everyday life. Or I may experience, when I am not out of my body, I may experience waking up in the middle of the night to find myself involved in a sexual relationship with someone who is traveling astrally. And this sort of phenomena has been recorded over and over and over again for centuries, with a lot of questions about it. I'm not quite sure what the question is or what to answer about it, except to say that we build bonds on a lot of levels, and when we are not completed in a whole relationship, a whole marriage relationship, we may allow our consciousness to fantasize a relationship with another individual. And when we experience astral travel, there's an interesting thing about astral travel. The destination of the body, the travel of the astral body, is guided by the mind. And I may be, for example, in out-of-body experience, I may be astral traveling in New York City, and for some crazy reason, all of a sudden London pops into my mind. Well, if it pops into my mind, I'm going to go there. And in a split second, I'm going to be there. And unless I learn to control my thoughts, to direct the astral body, I have very little control of that. Which also means I'm out of the body and I think of this person that I am attracted to. I'm going to find myself intimately involved in that, with that person, as a result of the consciousness being directed in that way.
We're living in a society where a lot of people's marriage is founded because they had no sexual experience before marriage. We're also living in a society where 10,000 girls below the age of 16 have abortions. I was wondering if you could comment on what you would regard as a good preparation for a lifelong partnership sexually.
Okay. First of all, obviously, very early in life, children need to be taught that they are all right and that they themselves, the individual, is the judge of whether I'm all right or not. Children must be taught very early, don't seek your all rightness from somebody else. Don't feel so inadequate that you have relationships in order to get somebody else to appreciate you. That is the single most prevalent cause of young girls becoming pregnant before they're old enough to form whole relationships. They want to feel appreciated, they want to feel noticed, they want to feel loved. They haven't been taught to be all right, and they're hungry for that. And who can blame them? It is an absolute survival need. It can get us into relationships we're ill-prepared for. So the first thing is to learn self-love and self-acceptance, self-appreciation, self-worth at a very early age. Number two, I think that children should be taught about their bodies. I mean, taking my own experience for an example, I certainly never saw my mother nude. I mean, it wouldn't even occur to me to think perhaps what she looks like or to fantasize or whatever. Well, not only that, I never saw my father nude. And if I could help it, I never saw my brother nude. He always hid. And as I hid from him, and my sister hid from us, and it was all this hiding around and pretending that we didn't have genitals, and pretending that we were not curious about one another's genitals. And goodness gracious, people who grow up like that are going to have an enormous curiosity about people's genitals. And it produces very difficult relationships, first of all, with having a curiosity that you're ashamed of, but that still exists. So the third thing, besides this idea of self-appreciation, self-worth, get to know your own body and find out that it is all right to explore it. For goodness sake, not only let your children know that it is all right to explore their bodies, but talk with them about their bodies and how they work. And let them know that it is all right to touch, it is all right to explore, it is all right to feel, and it is all right to know what one another look like. And I'm not suggesting that everybody should run around in their homes nude, but I am suggesting that if your child sees you undressed, don't rush to hide something as if it's not all right to look at it. I mean, if you hid your ear all the time, kids would get very curious about ears. And we would have enormous ear fetishes in this culture. Whatever you hide becomes the object of wanting to know. Don't make it such a thing. There's a very different thing in teaching appreciation and teaching that something is awful or to be hidden. I do think that both boys and girls should be taught that their sexuality is precious, that it is spiritual, that it is extremely special, and that it should be saved for very, very special people, and that a sexual relationship should be a very special relationship. It should not be done just for entertainment or indiscriminately or whatever, not because it is immoral to do so, but because that we lose the specialness of it if we do so. People who don't save the spiritual experience, the sexual experience, for a very special experience, never have that very special experience because they haven't made it special. So it is not because it is dirty, it is not because we shouldn't do it, but because we should totally enjoy the fulfillment of it, that we save it for very special people under very special circumstances, very special occasions. If children grow up feeling healthy and good and acceptable about their bodies, feel that sexuality is very special and very important and very all right, and know themselves and know one another's bodies so that there is not an unhealthy curiosity, then I think that we'll have a whole different generation. We won't have wild and rampant free sex, nor will we have the repression that we have now that is causing accusations and confusion and arresting people for fulfilling needs that they have had from early childhood. We need to get over this craziness.
First, I must excuse if I talk about something you have talked about, but I haven't been here all the time. But did you talk about sublimation, or what do you call it? To sublimate sexual energy?
No, I haven't talked about it.
Well, do you think that it might be healthy to live without sexuality? Do you think it's possible to convert it to something else and to create or whatever, something with that energy you might use for sexual purposes?
Yes, okay, I'll talk about that for a moment. The energy of creativity is the same energy that we use for sexual expression. It would be wrong to say that sexual energy is creative energy, that they're same. But the creative energy, the energy of life, the vital energy that we use for spiritual fulfillment is also the energy that is used in sexual expression. And that's the reason that in some spiritual groups, religions and so on, there have been the practice of brahmachari or celibacy for purposes of spiritual fulfillment. The idea being that if we don't release that energy sexually, then we will retain it and that it will move upward through the chakras of the kundalini into an enlightening experience. Now, the theory is good, it's all right, there's nothing wrong with the theory, it can happen. However, what usually happens is that when we resign ourselves to a life of celibacy, we so deny the urge of the passions themselves that instead of sublimating or instead of rising through the Kundalini, they are quenched and they die. And what you produce is not a very spiritual person, but a very passionless person. And so it doesn't always work. Now, celibacy can be helpful for spiritual experience if we keep the passion of creativity alive. At the same time, it is not a denial. It is instead a using, an encouraging of the energy and using it for a different purpose. So it is a transmutation of energy for spiritual purpose without denial and without quenching the fire that produces the energy.
To come back to this question of soulmates, you have mentioned that it is more important to look for a life mate. Does that imply that finding a soulmate does not necessarily have anything to do with a marriage relationship?
Not necessarily. Finding the life mate may be more important for a marriage relationship than finding the soulmate because of a couple of things. First of all, the soulmate may be in a body of the same sex as you. Number one. Number two, the soulmate may not be incarnate. Just because I'm incarnate doesn't mean that my soulmate is. And number three, even if I find my soulmate, that may not be the partner whose karma best fits my karma for this lifetime. So it may not be the fulfillment that I'm looking for in a marriage. Finding the person with whom I must work in order to fulfill what I came here to do, that's important, whether that's soulmate or not. And that's the reason that I suggest that we look for life mate instead. Someone to work along beside us as a partner for fulfillment of life purpose.
My question is related to what you just said about celibacy and sublimation. A situation can arise in a relationship where one partner no longer feels sexual desire, no longer wants to make love, and the other partner does. Can you give any advice on how to lovingly resolve that situation?
Okay. First of all, when one person in a partnership relationship is withholding sexuality from the other one, usually you should not look for something wrong in sexuality, but you should look for something wrong at an entirely different level. Why is that person withholding? Almost always it is a communication problem and not a sexual problem. When one person feels that they are not being respected or communicated with or whatever, one of the first things that happens in a sexual relationship is that we withhold ourselves, our sexuality especially, in order to express that I am not getting the attention or the communication or the emotional support that I need on another level. So instead of trying to force that person into a sharing of themselves sexually, usually there needs to be an exploration of what's going on in other levels of the relationship. Forget sex for a little bit because there's something wrong somewhere else. Then explore communication and do this marathon thing. That's a first step. Find out where that other person is feeling cut off. Why are they denying giving themselves totally to the relationship? It very seldom really, when you get down to the bottom line, it seldom has to do with celibacy for spiritual purpose, and it seldom has to do with what people really think and what they worry about. He's no longer exciting to me, or she no longer turns me on, we've just been married too long. Usually that's not the case. There is something that has come into the relationship that is blocking the giving of self totally to one another. And it usually needs a very deep communication to find out what that is. And what they'll find is a person who had lost their interest in another person suddenly becomes interested again because they've discovered a new facet of that person. If it really is one partner for spiritual purposes feeling a need to become celibate for spiritual growth, and the other partner doesn't feel that, then certainly there needs to be a renegotiation of their contract together.
You've talked about love and self-love very helpfully, but I'd like to know how one actually loves. It's easy to say it, but if one feels, say, hatred for somebody, I can see how that could change to love. But if one is indifferent, how does one do it then, even loving oneself?
Turning indifference into love. First of all, let me say that this may sound strange, but it's true. Love is a decision, and we love by deciding to love. I love myself when I decide to love myself. I take that as a responsibility. I decide, first of all, it's true what my body is, what my mind is, what my nature is, and it's true that I have a responsibility to really deeply love and care for that. And on the basis of that responsibility, I make a decision. I don't want for it to happen to me. And it doesn't seem that love is a decision. Most people say, well, I didn't decide to fall in love with him. The interesting thing is that the decision was made very much earlier in life and is made in the same way that emotional decisions are made. We think, I didn't decide to be angry with him, but we really did. It is a decision. That decision is usually based on habit. We made the decision way back earlier in life, and ever since then we have reacted out of habit to the same kind of stimulus. But it is a decision in every case. I decide to love, and I commit myself to that love, and I feed that love by saying so, by making that commitment, and by acting upon it.
I have several questions to ask. You say that marriage is or occurs on many different levels. Could you tell me what the fruits of marriage are? And can they all be realized by those who practice homosexual intercourse? You also go on to say that if children were raised with an open attitude towards sex, I'll rephrase that. If children are raised with an open attitude towards sex, will it eliminate homosexuality? And if so, shouldn't we be working today to eliminate homosexuality by eradicating those causes of it in the adults, and getting back to the root causes of it rather than just accepting it?
Okay, first of all, I think that we should be working at eliminating any sexual experience that is uncomfortable for the persons experiencing it. Whether that is a homosexual experience, a heterosexual experience, or an experience of lack of love, lack of fulfillment, whatever that is, there are many, 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 many experiences in our culture with sexuality that are unhealthy because of our attitudes. Now, as far as whether the experience of homosexuality would be eradicated if we had very healthy sex education early in life, I don't know that that would eradicate it. It certainly would make an enormous difference in the lives of many people who are now experiencing a homosexual lifestyle. But not necessarily would that change the karma of the individual or whatever the factor is. And keep in mind, there is not one particular syndrome that is a homosexual. There are people who have homosexual experiences because of a very deep lack of love from their father and a seeking of that from another man. I suppose if we were going to label these things, we would say that's not true homosexuality. It is a deep-seated need for acceptance from the father, and that's very, very common in men. If that need is met by another man on a sexual level, it may turn into a relationship where I keep continuing to satisfy my need for a right relationship with my father for the rest of my life by a homosexual relationship. There are homosexual experiences that are formed on a very different basis than that, and some of them may be formed on a basis that is hereditary in the sense of biological communication of the sexual identity. So that would not necessarily be changed by early training. Now, I do believe that we should definitely begin to experience a greater openness, a greater direction of teaching of sexuality early in life, acceptance of self and so on, not specifically for the purpose of eliminating homosexuality, but for the purpose of eliminating all discomfort and dysfunction in sexual experience in our whole society, and for total fulfillment of one another spiritually, of ourselves and of another, and certainly for the development of self-respect, self-love, and self-worth, and the opportunity to be spiritually complete for people. I think it's very important, one of the great spiritual needs of our society. We'll run out of time, and I have to stop now, and thank you very much for sharing with me. I've enjoyed being with you.